pays for food and the clothing, etc., and everything for her family, and the working capital for day two. So if you miss a day's work, you potentially close your business. This is a fragility, an area of exposure that so many small, young Indonesian businesses face in a country that has the most entrepreneurial energy I have ever come across. But this was the reality. And the turnover, the footfall of people into her store was too low, and the revenue was too low. Ibu Rori's husband works to pay for the overhead, to pay for where they live, for their children, food, the energy, etc. A great team. By giving Ibu Rori the ability to sell Pulsar, bill pay, recruit Grab drivers, which she was incredible at, we gave her a new side to her business. She also taught us a huge amount about street marketing, the way that she took our messaging and made it more local and impactful. We gave her assets, such as billboards, and she literally just made them her own. I saw Ibu Rori about 18 months later. She looked a very, very different lady. She looked really healthy. She looked very happy. Her business was doing well. Her pet stall was contributing to about 50% of her income, and had been an agent, a financial services agent, was contributing to being about 50% of her income. She was also teaching other small merchants in the area how to sell them these services and increase their business. This is what makes Indonesia unique. Ibu Rori is just one story in millions. What worries me about this story is I've personally met Ibu Rori. I've met her several times. How many people are we not serving? How many people have we not reached? How many people have we not helped during this period? And how many more do we need to help in the future? But this essentially is the model. When you digitalize a business, you increase its revenue. You increase its ability to capture more customers. You increase its ability to reduce its costs. You increase its ability to generate data. You increase its ability to plan and have financial services for growth. A business can only grow so far until you have to solve for working capital. Today, 74% of small merchants, micro SMEs, including warung owners, have no access to capital. You know, let's just think about that. How many people today have gone past a warung? How many people today have visited a warung? But 74% of them, 3 in 4, have no access to working capital and are most likely working on a 24-hour cash flow. 98% of them have no insurance. I am yet to come across the warung owner with any insurance, and none of them have any future planning or investment. If we really believe that the small, medium-sized enterprises of Indonesia are our future, we have to change these metrics. The only way to reach such a massive audience is digitally. And there's huge challenges in education, there's huge challenges in product development, and there's huge challenges for the industry to grow and be able to serve these people. That's why being in FinTech in Indonesia is an amazing privilege. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to speed up a bit now. As we said, FinTech is simply a combination of words, financial and technology. It's relatively new, a nebulous term that applies to emerging technology. It's often overused, and it's financial institutes that deliver services generally faster that are given this name. And we're seeing now in banking, we're talking about people moving to digital banking. Digital banking just means, to a large degree, is removing the need for local banking and a place with a door on a high street with bureaucracy to a place that is online, that is built in process. No change in governance, it's just the way that processes work. Everything that we do is driven by the customer's ability to do something. Everything we do is driven by our ability to change something for the customer, a problem statement. Now, at this point, I just want to anchor on a problem on data. If we take companies today, there are two distinctly different types of companies when it comes to data. And this is a super important point of governance. There are companies that use data to improve the way they serve their customer. There are companies that use data to improve the way they sell their customer. I think the governance around those two specific things have to be very different. The way OVO collects data today is so we can improve the way we serve our customers. We can improve the product we give them. We can offer products that have already been accepted for them. We can increase their ability to lend. We can show how they can invest. It is not used to sell the customer. And I think as industry is emerging around these two behaviors, it's very important to understand them. Data and technology has to work symbiotically in FinTech. When we look at something like electronic Know Your Customer, EKYC, which is our identity services, it's super important that there is information we can gather to predict the likelihood of the accuracy of the data. And at the same time, the customer is asked to provide data openly and transparently. We can then cascade that into many different areas of the business. So once we have a clear profile of a customer, we can start to look at how that performs against financial services and payments. We can advise the customer to increase their limits. We can advise the customer reduce their lending. We can look at methods of offering insurance. Very different ways of thinking. But ultimately, all the data on the right-hand side, so the data lake that we process is very different to a data set that a traditional business will have. Even a supply chain business, because we overlay geography, we overlay microtransactions. We look at the community of individuals to provide better technology and better services. What is very important to me is the data purpose of collecting must be serving the customer. And we must only collect the data relevant to serve the customer. So we have an internal policy that we do not collect data that is not required. This really differentiates us against other companies today that are trying to do mass acquisition of data to sell. And I think as you emerge into your different industry sectors through technology, through education, I think one of the things that is becoming more important is we select the right culture for the future of our company. As the CEO of OVO, this is very important to me personally, that we do not use data inappropriately and that we don't use technology inappropriately. It is here to serve Indonesia. And we'll come on to principles about this later. Next slide, please. The advantages of FinTech. Very interesting that when we think about FinTech, when we think about what FinTech does, I think some people think there's some kind of magic that happens with FinTech in places like China. And it really isn't an ability to do anything that is so different from existing industry. What is different is the way we acquire the customer, the agility of the platform, the governance that we can overlay and the transparency of that reporting, and then the financial efficiency. Let's take a bank. A bank is located in one place, your local bank. It can serve people from that geography. People that live closer to the bank are more likely to visit it more often. People who live further away from the bank or have disabilities or issues or timing issues that they're working when the bank is open are often more underserved. It's very difficult to scale this. When we look at FinTech, FinTech is scalable. We can acquire across the whole geography of Indonesia with one online outlet. So the scalability of the platform is huge, as is the localization of the platform. So through geo proximity, we can look at the difference of the messaging in Kalimantan, Papua, Java. It can be very different. And often with a country like Indonesia, there needs to be nuances in messaging, timing, positioning. We work across multiple time zones. A technology platform can have rule sets that allow this to happen, can have interfaces that can be curated to serve that problem. On speed to market, technology is often faster than a manual process, but I also want to bust one myth. Technology companies can't get to market well in under 24 weeks. You need time to plan your product. You need time to understand your customer. And you need time to test, trial, and execute. In technology, we often use the phrase MVP, minimum viable product. The problem is we often have people focusing on minimum, but they don't focus on viable. A minimum product has to be viable. Ideally, we want a maximum viable product. So to get to market, whilst it's faster than traditional businesses, it's not overnight. The product has to evolve and develop to get to market in a fully viable way that impacts the customer. And so there is a large amount of agility. Time to market is faster than traditional businesses, and the data mass that we collate allows us to move quickly. But if there is one advantage of FinTech over traditional businesses, it's the lack of legacy. If we look at the huge systems in banks today, they're often built up over a long period of time. This creates many challenges for people. So when they want to move to, say, an API-driven scenario where two technology companies are transferring data within strict parameters using technology, banks often can't move to this as quickly as an organization like OVO, like Gojek, like Tokopedia, because we don't have the legacy. We are building our systems and our platforms for now. And because Indonesia is a mobile-first economy rather than an infrastructure-first economy, there is actually very little national legacy, which allows us to move actively. Lastly, the conditions in Indonesia, the fact that the country is a mobile-first economy is quite extraordinary. In terms of governance, some organizations would say that FinTech is less governed than a traditional business. I actually think this isn't correct, because the way we manage is through full data transparency. So literally, you can see all of our products and services in one place, an application. You can see all of our data in our daily, weekly, monthly automated reporting. You can see our compliance. There is nowhere to hide it. It's a fully transparent governance model. So actually, this is better for the customer and it's better for the regulator. So I don't believe that FinTech runs on a lower level of governance. And certainly in OVO, we are always working to improve our governance. Lastly, financial effectiveness. If we look at the cost of acquisition offline to the cost of acquisition online, the delta is huge. Today, OVO talks to millions of customers, and a lot of those customers stay with us, around 80 to 90% per month, continue to operate on our platform. So the loyalty is now becoming very high. Cost is also very low. The benefit of that is a profitable bank or lending company. It's actually a lot more effective in the product we can give the customer. The diversification of the platforms, not just been a lending platform, not just been a payments platform, but allowing our systems to run symbiotically across the verticals, a more economical route to market. And then ultimately, we democratize traditional businesses. And this scares industry. If we look at China today, and financial and WeChat democratized so many traditional businesses. Investment was non-existent in China before Yourbao. So this democratization is actually a combination of its agility, its in governance, and its financial performance that allows this democratization, just like we're democratizing payments in Indonesia today. Next slide, please. FinTechs have to differentiate more than anybody. And mobile banking is an area that we see in Indonesia is primed for the next frontier of change. We see that Bank Jago is leading this today. We see lots of information building how their leader there, Jerry Yang, who's a very good friend of mine, how he's changing banking. And lots of different businesses, including OVO, continue to look at how we disrupt banking, positively disrupt it. For merchants, this can mean instant liquidity, instant money. This is super important. In an offline world, it can often take time between the transaction from a customer to the merchant receiving the money. And that time in the instance of fraud can be debilitating. I also think that as we continue to look at the merchant, the bank has to perform differently, allowing fluid processing of credit and business, rather than a static processing as it is today. So the merchant proposition of online banking is very different to what we see in offline today. Instant gratification, you'll hear this phrase more. Somebody needs money now. The bank has to allow the money to move. This doesn't work. It's often taking days rather than minutes. In the case of somebody needing money for medical treatment, it's often too late. Retail customers, being able to pay fast, not slow, to be able to pay at the point of sale, whether that be online, offline, whether that's a large customer, a large merchant, or a small merchant. The process should be the same. The customer then has confidence. We see from that the customers store value, build into financial planning, and eventually investment. This is financial. Through its stored value, as we move into banking, that money is stored in our own bank and becomes an effective lower cost of capital to lending. It allows the digital bank to also compete with large-scale traditional banks. So I believe we will still see a fast acceleration in e-money, but we will see more of a blend between e-money and digital banking, and we will start to see a separation of services from merchant services and consumer services. This is as industry matures and develops in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So we can see that, we can certainly see how different markets benefit from different forms of technology. We can see that China, as a high population, dispersed market with a low penetration of infrastructure, really accelerated because of FinTech. We can see that more governed markets with high levels of infra often move slowly into FinTech. And we've seen in COVID, things like QR, Western Europe and North America, is now growing where it's been static. Whereas in Asia, QR has been growing rapidly because we're a mobile first. So we look here, look at Indonesia, high population, 270 million people, over 100 million people underbanked and underserved, internet penetration very high, device penetration high, smart device penetration improving very quickly. And in terms of the relaxed regulation, I think the way I would describe rather than relaxed is an appropriate level of regulation for growth. We'll talk more about regulation later and the way that industry and regulation needs to work together. But this really offers an effective method to low friction payment across a multitude of use cases, whether you're on the go in a car, whether you're ordering online, whether you're rushing to buy a coffee in the morning, or even if you're paying at the warung for nasi goreng at lunchtime. It offers a fast, consistent, safe execution. Lending, the mass distribution that we need today to propagate growth in Indonesia can only happen digitally. Somebody has to bridge the gap of data to allow the algorithms of scoring to work. Insurance and investment is massively underserved today. It really is at the beginning of its journey. And again, the only way we can solve that journey is by looking at the industry sectors and solving for the customer friction point. We'll talk a bit more about insurance later too. Next slide, please. When this happens, when these conducive environments of complex geography, large customer group, ability to attract a large amount of data, an inclusive data lake, and technology happen simultaneously with an underpinning environment for good governance and regulation, you see massive growth. And we see that today, the growth across the world is just huge. But we also see that this is more impactful in Asia and Africa, where the legacy is allowing this to happen, the lack of legacy, I should say. We see in North America and we see in Europe, this is slower. Now, Europe's starting to catch up. Europe is changing. However, I do believe that Asia should be accelerating away from Europe. We should be accelerating faster than we are, and we should be propagating growth faster than we are. So we can certainly learn from the other emerging markets, such as Africa, but also I think we should be driving a new frontier of innovation, specifically for Indonesia, specifically for Southeast Asia, because the geography is different, the culture is different, and the problems are highly localized. Next slide, please. We talked about decentralized decision-making. To allow decentralized decision-making in a business, you must create a consistent governance. In OVO, it's very important for us that we look at good governance for the industry first and foremost. This allows us to develop for the customer, reference these core principles, and allow us to then execute. Financial stability is very important to us. Some businesses believe that the way to grow value is, to some degree, to buy value. This is not sustainable. We see some of the investments coming into Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and globally as non-sustainable. And we've seen through investment and through good governance, some businesses in FinTech have had their CEOs removed. This isn't the way that we can operate. You have to operate with financial prudence. You have to have a plan to get to sustainability. And the unit economics have to be on course to deliver that. OVO Payments is in its 4th year. We are already GM positive, gross margin positive, but we are still loss making because of our subsidies on certain usage models. But we see that we can get payments to profitability over the next 2 years, and we have set a course to correct the financial losses quarter by quarter. Financial acumen, stability, and longevity are critical in setting up small businesses, and cash flow is the biggest killer of any business in any insurance vertical, in any industry vertical. So financial acumen, stability, and prudence is critical to me. I'm not really a startup guy. I am a professional CEO who's come from industry. So I very much look at this longevity. Conduct and fairness is something that I think we can all continue to hold the company accountable for at every level. Even with my own children, I always say to them, close your eyes, think what's right. With regulation, we can do that more so because we can see what's regulated and what's right. So I don't find it hard to run a business that is making the right choices. So when we launch products, we make sure we've conducted ourselves appropriately, and we make sure we make fair decisions, internally, externally, for partners, customers, merchants. Lastly, the prudential regulation. The prudence of regulation is a challenge. It's always growing. Earlier this morning, I had a call regarding a lending product where the regulation is ambiguous. So we reviewed a launch, we reviewed the risk, the loan management systems and operations, and we reviewed our go-to-market strategy. We then looked at the regulations and said, okay, but in the fairness of the regulations, what do we believe the regulator is trying to achieve? And are we upholding that value? If the answer is yes, execute. If the answer is no, stop and revert to the regulator. And then lastly is this competition and innovation. I really do not believe in focusing so much on the competition in a market like Indonesia. I've said this consistently over the last 3 years. If we're not careful, the industry is spending all of its time fighting each other. We should be fighting for financial inclusion. So I believe competition is very healthy. I believe that focusing on our customer is the best way to solve for competition. And I believe by innovating around the customer's issue and providing better services, we will always win more hearts and minds than simply attacking the industry. We often see where industry invests on market share shift. My market share is 20%. I'm going to overinvest. I'm going to get to 40%. You often see that is futile, and they'll naturally return to the correct market share. This is the meritocracy of consumers. If they don't like the culture of your company, they do not believe you are being fair, they will leave you, irrespective of how big you are. We've seen huge companies in industry that have gone through very tough times with their external brand. The way that Uber has changed its reputation over the last 2 to 3 years, the way that we saw Microsoft change, it went to market from the late 90s to today under a very highly empathetic and driven CEO. So this can happen to any company. But I believe if you focus on financial stability, if you conduct yourself in fair and right way, if you look at the purpose of prudential regulation, and then you act with innovation and the customer at the center of everything you do, then it's very hard at any level in the company to make the wrong decision. Next slide, please. Industry in Indonesia, we say it's nascent, but because of the size of the country and the size of the opportunity, it's growing at an alarming rate. So we're now talking about billions of dollars being transacted through fintechs. As an industry, we can't solve for this alone. And often we see that fintechs don't want to play with existing industry companies. Existing industry companies may not want to play with fintech. Regulators are then struggling to have commonality in regulation, and then the industry is fighting. I think when industries are like that in that condition, I think it's really bad for the overall ecosystem of the countries in that industry sector, and it's bad for the country. It's difficult for the regulators, it's difficult for governance. And I'm glad to say in Indonesia, I've seen industry mature. We're seeing industry bodies such as IFSOC and AFPI, FinTech, join the market and create good governance and good behaviors. The FinTech Society of Indonesia has been working for some time now to really create single voice. And IFSOC, under Pak Mirza's guidance, is really looking at some of the governance issues of the Indonesian FinTech Society. This all helps us create consistency of voice from industry. If we look at a problem like digital banking, we can all go in our separate directions and we can all fight. Or we can work together, collaborate, learn, and accelerate. There will always be competition. And in my experience, customers always prefer to have more than one choice. So I don't believe in this industry there will be one winner. I think there'll be multiple winners in multiple verticals. So there may be different winners in insurance to winners in lending. But ultimately, there will be a few large fintechs that really frame the future of Indonesia. And it's important that we continue to work very closely with the regulator. We think about the time of COVID and the way we've worked together on things like Kartu Prakerja, QRIS. It's been very important to us. So we're seeing that the industry is still young. The collaboration between critical stakeholders is improving, but really to project Indonesia to its rightful place, we will all have to work closer together on the development of systems, governance, and regulation. And the role of industry bodies, such as the FinTech Society, IFSOC, and AFPI, will become critical as the industry gets bigger, and we need to corral and create a single voice. Next slide, please. Adequate governance is absolutely essential. If we look in China, the P2P platform acceleration from 2016 was just incredible. And if you look at the issues of capital deployment and misdeployment, it was colossal. We saw P2P companies creating pyramid Ponzi schemes where ultimately the customers lost their money. And even today in China, there are several high-profile leaders still under home arrest due to issues of financial governance. This is a great example where governance, regulation, and industry become misaligned. What was worrying, because at that time as well, is only a low proportion of incidents were investigated. So who lost? It's highly unlikely it was institutional lending. It's more likely it's personal lending. So the NPL, the loss of the schemes was high. The regulation was relatively lax, and these companies grew massively, aggressively, because they had to continue to be seen to be growing, to be lending more, to really create the right data set that looked like the company was in a productive period. So by accelerating the lending, they could make the historical NPL look at a smaller proportion. If you lend 100 and have a loss of 20, it looks bad. If you, in the following year, lend 200 on a previous year's loss of 10, it looks a lot better. It was a lot of that illegitimate reporting and no consistency of governance of reporting that allowed this to become a massive problem in China. Then we saw there was a correction. There was a correction on data and data mass. There was a correction on identity systems. There was a correction on business governance and reporting, and there was a correction on regulation. And today, this has greatly improved the distribution of lending in China. This is where FinTech is not always good. When FinTech is used for bad, when FinTech is used for opportune moments of creating monetary wealth for a few, it has to be governed quickly. I believe in Indonesia, we are genuinely trying to build the right set of governance, the right companies, and the right regulation to protect the customer, protect the merchant, protect the industry, and protect the country. I actually really believe in this. And the close proximity that we work together is incredible. In Western Europe and North America, regulators and industry often have a very formal communication. The problem with this, it doesn't allow you to move quickly to solve problems. Whereas I find in Indonesia, we have a very appropriate, respectful, but closer working relationship with the regulator. I think this allows regulation to move very quickly. And we've seen under the guidance of Paperi, Bank of Indonesia has issued a blueprint for 2025 payments, which will greatly improve the streamlining of licensing, the governance of liquidity and equity, and the requirements of business. I see this as very productive. We must never allow FinTech in Indonesia to damage society or our industry. Next slide, please. Working groups help collaboration. If we look at AFTEC, the Indonesian FinTech Society working through lending, they really do work across the industry. They look at the way they do, look at different areas and provide task force, governance, innovation, feedback, and correction to regulation. Whether that be the way we think about a shared fraud database, so we can share that collaboratively across the industry and prevent multiple cases of fraud on a single ID, whether we look at tax systems, payment systems integration, whether we look at creating standards around cybersecurity, whether it's the financial planning acumen that's required in the industry, this allows an industry that is high in entrepreneurialism to operate at least at a standard bar, where we have to achieve that bar through regulation, through reporting, through audits, and through systems. For such a young development as an industry, this sets a relevant bar that we can continue to build on. So as an industry professional, I'm very positive about having organizations such as IFSOC, FinTech Society, and AFTEC working with us to make sure we all attain the right bar as our performance of governance for our customers. Next slide, please. Kartu Prakerja was challenging for many reasons. So some of you will know about this program in terms of the government dispersal during COVID. And it had to be executed very quickly. And it had to reach the right people. And the successful disbursements was very interesting because we knew on the offline, it's both time consuming and ineffective to do mass dispersal. When we look at countries like China, all of their dispersal, or 90% of their dispersal plus, is running through digital systems, which allows tracking and it makes sure the right person gets the right amount at the right time. In Kartu Prakerja, we didn't just listen to the government and what they needed. We innovated to say, what does the customer need? So the government needs a program that is compliant, that is legislative bound, that operates with a regulator and distributes money. For us as a FinTech, we have big challenges because we weren't dealing with the registration. So we needed to corroborate the user, the potential for fraud, and the dispersal. It also meant that we did a huge amount of identity work before the distribution of any money. In reality, when we've been audited, the successful disbursement rate of 99.8 in a young country like Indonesia is quite incredible. In Africa, we hear of disbursement rates that are far lower than this and far less accurate. So I think we were very pleased in the way that the government, Bank of Indonesia, and the industry, not just OVO, but banks like BRA, GoPay, OVO, Link Asia, work together to really improve the process for all concerned. And ultimately with one ambition, serve Indonesians who needed it most. This is a great example where governance from a central bank, directives from government, and innovation from industry can impact real lives. We need to learn from this, and we need to do this more. But this is one of the key roles of FinTech, how we help existing industry sectors, private and commercial, accelerate faster. Next slide, please. In terms of our operating principles, they're very simple. And again, this provides us with clear stepping stones. So there's principles from the industry, and these are our operating principles inside. Number one, build an open ecosystem. Number two, leverage data and technology. And number three, stimulate growth through positive disruption. Number one, open ecosystem is critical for us. We are not about serving and controlling the customer in a specific area. You can only buy this if you pay with this. That feels very controlled. The principle of OVO is you should be able to use OVO anytime, anywhere, in the way that you want. So even as we've built out our online presence with large organizations and small organizations, it's their responsibility to compete, not mine. My job is to serve the customer, to pay online and maximize their potential. When we leverage data in a positive way. It has to add value or be synergistic, ideally both. So again, this comes back to the principle of data for adding value, serving your customer. And often data allows us to have synergies across multiple verticals. So we can often look at our identity data, and that allows us to serve e-money, banking, insurance, investment, and other financial services. So we build systems that leverage data and technology to drive synergy. And then lastly, the stimulation of positive disruption. This is really important as a principle, that we are not investing to move market share. We are investing to solve problems and propagate growth. We do that to two specific ways. Number one, digital transformation of the industry. Number two, transforming the customer experience and reducing the barrier to entry. Distributed industry through technology is very different in each of our verticals. If we take payments, it's about democratizing payments. If we take insurance, there are lots of inefficiencies we see in the existing insurance industry. A high, massive population of agents with a large proportion of their insurance applications failing to pass the criteria requirements. Secondarily, the products in insurance today are often quite cumbersome and dated. In OVO, working with our joint venture with Zhong'an, we're bringing technology to, first of all, disrupt the industry. How do you improve the quality of the submission? How do you improve the data flow and the fraud management? How do you improve the actual cover to ensure that the customer has insurance at the right time? How do you then ensure that the dispersal and the insurance review and claim is also administrated appropriately? There is massive opportunities for OVO to work with the industry on digital transformation. On the customer side of disruption for insurance, it's important we disrupt the customer at the time they need insurance. If we look today, If you want life insurance, etc., it's fine. You can think about it, you can plan it, you can engage different organizations, and hopefully you can gain insurance. However, when we're talking about disrupting individuals' insurance, you have to disrupt at the moment that they require the insurance, not in a centralized process, but in a decentralized process. So for instance, if you have something like a mobile device and you want the customer to insure that device for cracked screen or things like that, you're more likely having to disrupt the customer at the moment they buy the device. If you're insuring against being in an accident in a car, you're better to insure at the time the customer is entering the car to think about, do you want to insure this right? Yes. The insurance model is very different to the customer going to the insurance company, to the FinTech serving the customer. So this stimulation of growth through positive disruption, two key strategies: digital transformation of insurance or any industry, and secondarily, disrupting the product with the customer in the moment they need it. Next slide, please. Okay. OVO serves a rich and diverse set of partners, and this has taken a lot of hard work to build. It's not something that you can do in a short period of time. You have to win trust, and you have to logically build an open ecosystem over a period of time to create that centrifugal impact where today our customers are storing tens of millions of dollars with us. They're planning to have money in their wallet between 5 and 7 days, and they're making multiple transactions on a single day. We're starting to see the 360 life of the customer, and we're starting to see the merchant trends around how the customer interacts. So it benefits both sides. Offline continues to be important, less so in a time of COVID, but it will come back and it will continue to be important. Online in Indonesia is growing massively. It's a very competitive sector, but if we look at the consolidated, the large scale e-commerce to the long tail, consolidated is still a relatively low proportion, between 15 and 20%, where over 80% of sales of e-commerce are actually on small merchants. So there's also a lot to do in terms of serving the long tail and not just the consolidated area. Financial services, working with third parties, Zhongan, Barexa, Prudential, banks, is critical. Financial services partners are a part of our open ecosystem. And we will continue to develop new use cases, whether that is different types of express services for delivery, whether that's new food services, whether it's travel, transport, planning, investment, saving, gold, bonds. All of these things will continue to grow our open ecosystem. And we will compete to provide the best service for our customer. We will not play a role in our partners competing against each other. Next slide, please. Charity is a large part of the ecosystem, especially in Indonesia, where giving back is a large part of our lives. I see in Indonesia, often those with the least are the ones that come forward to give. I think this is a great asset in our society through religion and through other functions of giving back and supporting and helping, especially in an ecosystem, a geographic ecosystem that suffers with national disasters. Naturally, we have storms, rain, mudslides, we have earthquakes, we have volcanoes, we have tidal waves. We have many things that impact Indonesia, and we must continue to serve NGOs and charity platforms as a platform. And it's an area that we've started to work on, but we can greatly improve. This is very important to me personally, and I believe in any industry, in any business, the CEO should have a strategy around NGOs and charity. In FinTech, we can continue to help industry transformation and digitalization in charities. We can improve governance of reporting to prevent fraud, and we can help as an ecosystem. Next slide, please. Okay, so digital payments. I just wanted to break this down and just talk a bit more about fintech in a specific industry and what it did, and how we look at our competitive advantage. Realistically, I'm just going to focus on one thing, which is moving money. I had a great experience in Indonesia where one of my, the people around me most closest was trying to move money back to Kalimantan. First of all, because of where the family is in Kalimantan, it was quite far, the kampung was quite far from the nearest bank. The time for them to get there and get to that bank because of transport was around 5 days. So the aim was that they were going to ask somebody to take money on a flight and then ask their parents to go to another place and then pick up the money. A very manualized and protracted affair. It really doesn't going to work. When we look at this from a digital perspective, we can make sure that we know who the customer is. We can uphold governance. We can make sure from anti-money laundering, from fraud, from all those perspectives, we can make sure that the person originating the transaction is who they are. So we can solve for that pay point. We can do exactly the same on the receiving side, and we can transition that money immediately. So it becomes simple, fast, secure. It's effortless, it's low friction, and it moves very quick. And it means the customer then has the money they need to order what they need online, or indeed cash out from multiple points. This really is how digital payments has been democratized for remittance. When it comes to actual cash availability, because so much money moves, physical money moves in Indonesia between physical places, the cost of cash management is very high. And in a time of a pandemic, the infection rate and the carrier rate can also be very high. So we can see here, through democratizing payments, through increasing velocity with no cost, you can change the way people send and receive money. It sounds very simple, but if you just look at our requirements for anti-money laundering, fraud, and identity, it's a huge effort. This is how fintech changes lives. Next slide, please. Building on this, there are 4 principles that we use for all of our customers. So we have our industry principles, we have our company principles, and we have our customer principles. The customer principles are at the center of everything we do, every product. So you've heard about the way that insurance has to reach the masses, the way that payments has to reach across the whole country, multiple usage models. Mass distribution of every product we serve is important. Payments, insurance, wealth, lending, it has to be in the masses. FinTech only really works when it's on a mass distribution network. So that means that you must create a system that will operate through your own applications, your own services, but also in partnerships with others. So you see in China that the distribution of investments is now huge, and across a whole ecosystem, its own businesses and applications. OVO's first principle is whatever we do, we must be able to distribute at mass. Payments, for instance. Next is the product has to be of the lowest friction and the highest velocity. However, it still must uphold regulation and governance. So if we think about paying online, if we think, I ordered Grab food recently, yesterday, literally order, single point, paid. Very low friction, high velocity, and an integrated service on a third-party application. That's given us mass distribution of our payments. It's given us a low friction, high velocity service. The customer enjoys that service and becomes synonymous with their lifestyle. Instant gratification. So you've accessed the product, you've completed the payment, you must see that your order is complete. Whether that be insurance, I'm insured. There's my saving. This is what I bought. The gratification must be immediate. When we look at something like our investment product, this was critical. And then lastly, in a community such as we have in Indonesia, liquidity. If the customer cannot get their cash out immediately, it's a reverse psychology. They won't put their capital in. And because sometimes the requirements are you just need money to live, it's imperative to me that the customer can get the money out. So when we think about our minimum viable product, we must always have mass distribution, low friction, high velocity, achieving governance, instant gratification, instant liquidity. Whenever I see one of our products fail, and every failure in OVO is my fault because I am the CEO, we have failed on one of these points. We maybe don't have the distribution right. There's a delay in the way the customer can impact the product. If we look at our investment products at the moment, there's too much friction. There's too many times when the customer is in the process of investing and says no. There is times when there's a delay in showing the customer what they've accessed, the service. But generally speaking, customers can always get liquidity in OVO. So when we uphold these products, we have amazing results. When we fail on these products and these principles, we can see them clearly. And we continue to build out and build our products on these 4 principles. Next slide, please. Giving the customer total transparency and honesty is a key principle, I guess, in its own right. We often use the word principles too much. But whatever we do when we're distributing, whatever we do when we're allowing the customer to access, it's important to us to be really clear with the call to action. Education in FinTech is a big problem. Trying to show, help, understand, and teach is super difficult in a geography like Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So keeping 100% transparent with the customer, offering them 100% clarity, and give them a clear call to action is something that we also see as critical. We often find that when products fail, there isn't enough absolute clarity. With OVO Invest, particularly the work we're doing with Bakar and Barexa, we find that the transparency and of what they can see, how they can earn, and how they can save is so clear. We had around 134,000 people invest in us in a very short period of time across a diverse demographic. Again, when we deliver clarity of a service, the impact is huge. When there is any complexity that allows doubt, when the language of the product isn't quite clear, the proposition isn't quite clear, or the problem we are solving isn't quite clear, I often see FinTech fail. We can often see products in FinTech are overdeveloped, but they're not clear. So they look wonderful. And then I see organizations failing and not understanding why. I think absolute transparency, whether it's about your product, whether it's about your data, whether it's about the expectations for your customer, you must communicate clearly, transparently, openly, and honestly. I know as a customer, when that happens to me, I enjoy the product, the service, the experience. When it doesn't happen to me, I will not go back to that company. Next slide, please. Negative disruption, we've talked about it in lending, but negative disruption via FinTech is always an opportunity. We've seen it in many ways around the world. We see phishing online as a big problem. We must educate our customers on people trying to take over their accounts. We see that decentralized, corrupt behavior of individuals and groups. We also see it where in the event of GameStop, where there was almost a vigilante approach to really allow a company to trade at a higher value than they were really worth. The problem is real people lost real money. So these vigilante approaches can also be a problem for FinTech. So I would encourage everybody on this course to consider when technology and FinTech is not positive, because unilaterally it is not. And it's often down to the credibility of the individuals, the use of data, or opportune regulation. And I'd ask you to consider when this happens and what the impact is. It often drives mistrust in industry. It's something as an industry we must continue to fight. We must work together as an industry with the regulator to stop these things happening, and we must protect people's money, whether that be in payments, whether that be investments such as trading, stock market trading, whether it's in something like gold where somebody is having an excessive take rate. We must make sure there is appropriate regulation to protect. We must ensure as an industry, we also actively report. So for instance, one of the things that OVO does, it monitors phishing attempts on Kartu Prakerja, and then we report it. So we're actually trying to help the government by seeing different organizations trying to emulate, use phishing as an industry, as a solution to fraud. Next slide, please. Digital disruption through partnerships, for me, is always the most amazing. When we work on things together, yes, it works, but OVO wasn't built in isolation. And I haven't seen any FinTech really in payments be in isolation. They must have usage model and partnership. So we saw through working together with organizations like Lipo Group, working with organizations like Grab, working with organizations like the Post Office, Cantor Boss, all these different organizations adding usage models, changing the way the customer paid, changing the way the customer accessed their stored value, changing the way the customer accessed capital. That's why OVO grew, through partnerships. If we look at lending, working together with BRI, Bank Mandiri, different organizations for lending, Bank Danamon, we're not working just as OVO. With Bank Danamon, for instance, we're using OVO algorithms and Bank Danamon algorithms, and then cooperating to say what's the best lending algorithm. Working in partnerships will accelerate far faster than working in isolation. We can build the technology, the reporting, and the ability to collect data, but often working with existing industry partners is far more accelerated in terms of its impact than working in isolation. So I believe wholeheartedly that working as an industry through partnerships is the way that OVO, the way that FinTech, and the way the industry helps Indonesia accelerate towards its goal. Next slide, please. Okay, a few slides left. Data scoring and socialization. Data scoring is something that is still relatively new in emerging markets. In Western Europe, North America, I can go onto a regular website, I can look at my score, I can look at what's impacted that positively, and in the event something's impacted it negatively, why. And I can continue to manage my score. I can even see if somebody is using my profile to apply for a service. So for instance, somebody could say, hey, have you applied for a car loan? I can say no, and that loan will be blocked. So this is really developed a long way considering where we are today in Indonesia. However, the way we're looking at scoring, this is critical to education. The basis of all financial services is profile. And giving somebody a score against that profile allows you to understand where they are in terms of financial inclusion. We've built a scoring system here that is task orientated. It allows the customer to go through an online university using the assets from Ojokan and BI and learn about financial inclusion. And by participating in this, we can allocate points. We can then show them the gap between where they are and where they need to be for their specific requirement. Let's say it's working lending capital. in a warrant. They can then start to give us more assets in terms of their fixed address, in terms of images, in terms of data on their business, and we can increase their scoring. We can give them understanding how to access financial services. We can use quizzes, gamification, and other things to engage the customer. It's critical that we use these types of engagements to really embed the customer's thinking and help them understand how they access services and also what their responsibility is. I often see in lending, there's terrible stories about people becoming over-leveraged, over-lending through misunderstanding. It's our responsibility to ensure that the customer just doesn't understand the products and services, but understands their responsibility. The reason this is so critical to me is actually when we launched OVO Pay Later, our customer services had a spike in calls. I asked to investigate these and I spent a day with the customer services team. What I learned was the majority of their calls were actually asking, why can't I have OVO Pay Later? Why am I excluded? And there were some harrowing stories about people that needed it for different reasons, be that medical, be that food, be that accommodation, be that real life problems, first world, real first world problems. This really upsets you when you look at the data and you realize what it must feel like to be excluded. We talk about financial inclusion, but what does financial exclusion mean? What does poverty feel like? I really think it's important we build these tools as industries. We help people grow on their journey to financial inclusion and financial services. But I also think it's vitally important that people understand what they need to do to access services and what their responsibility is once they have those services. So it's not just about the products and the services themselves. It's sometimes about helping the customer understand their profile and how they can access different things. Next slide, please. OVO insurance. I've talked about OVO insurance now several times. In Indonesia today, the insurance market is growing very slowly. So the actual policy growth is about 3%, but the degradation, the decline in revenue is something similar. So ultimately, as an industry, it's static. The products are quite static. They're not really, the barrier to entry is quite high. Affordability of premiums is a problem. And there's also a big problem with trust. OVO gave away COVID insurance for free. Only 50,000 people took free insurance, and it was genuine free insurance. Partnering with Prudential is really helping us take a traditional service, a great, amazing global brand that's been in Indonesia for, I think, about 30 years, learn from their problems, learn from their customers, and target instant approval, disrupt the product with affordable premiums, and lastly, streamline the claim so the customer has confidence. I keep coming back to this requirement to work as an industry. Insurance, it's not about disrupting. It's about giving the customer an appropriate level of product in the way they want it, when they want it, and how they want it. It's changing the industry from the customer going to the insurance company to insurance going to the moment in time where the customer needs it. Next slide, please. The flywheel effect when this happens is extraordinary. People often forget that Ant Financial is a company of over 15 years old and Alibaba of over 20 years old. It feels very new, but it takes time to build the fundamentals of a FinTech company. When you do this and you create this massive user base, accessing a common wallet and a common marketplace for financial services in a dedicated application and in other places, it creates massive confidence. You lock in users by providing access to money, short-term availability, etc. So the customer knows that whatever happens, they can continue to live their life with consistency. So if you're somebody like an Ibururi and you have to take a day off sick, it's not the end of your world. It's a day off sick. You build out the marketplace models, whether it's for payments, whether it's for financial services. So it's not just about driving your own products and services. It's about creating a whole ecosystem that lives within this flywheel. And then additional levels of engagement, giving them more financial products, giving them more insight, giving them more accessibility. This creates the flywheel. My belief is that what we're trying to grow in Indonesia, number one, in terms of having the right principles as the industry, I believe as an industry, we're on the right trajectory. Having the right principles in our company, in terms of the trajectory we're on and making sure that we always act with the right level of governance and put the customer first. With the right product principles around distribution, around the velocity and the low friction, instant gratification and liquidity, that's the way we care for our customer, number three. And then lastly, building an open ecosystem. So you can do what you want, where you want, how you want, but differentiate the services to the customer and the business. FinTech is certainly at the center of what is happening in Indonesia. But it's not just about technology. FinTech is around existing industry partners, technology industry partners, data, governance, and regulation. When these things work symbiotically, it has a huge impact and an accelerating impact on the economy. And there is always the risk of negative use of FinTech. And as an industry, we must always be looking for new ways for crime to exist and eradicate it. Next slide, please. This is another person that I hold dearly. Paddy, he's a great guy. His warung is not far from my office. He makes great food. He's a very accomplished man. He's very proud that he's got one of his children into higher education. He now has two mopeds. His daughter uses one to get to college on. He uses the other for his work. He's a great guy when it comes to business acumen. He knows exactly how many covers he will sell every day. So Pahari, he makes satay, but it's like satay with a twist, very, very normal for Indonesia. There's a unique flavor. He burns the soy sauce slightly and he puts some additional things in there. He makes exactly the number of servings, covers he requires. He gets up at 4 a.m. to make sure that he gets the best, I am the best chicken. He produces his number of covers, which I believe 65 the last time I spoke to him. He then takes that and he sells it by 3 p.m. in the evening, and he sells 100% of what he produces. An amazing man. He's looking to move his existing warung to a new area, because as we know in Jakarta, areas are often transforming and either the footfall, the number of consumers is rising or falling. He's one of those people that we must serve. And he's somebody, this isn't just somebody I'm showing you a picture of. This is somebody I send WhatsApps to and make sure he's safe. It's somebody I care about. He's somebody that's taught me a lot about Indonesian business and about the value of it. We need to solve the Bahari and the millions around him. There's too many people that are not having access to bank services, loans, etc. They just don't have the ability. The loan penetration in this area is just so low. And there's no way for him to build for the future and save for his family or for future businesses. That means the life cycle often of these small businesses is very short. So there is an improvement of life and a return to poverty, an improvement of life, return to poverty. We need to get that trajectory more refined and defined so these people have a better life. The fact we are on this call together says we are privileged. It's very important to me that we solve this problem together. I do not believe OVO can do this on its own, but I do believe by working as an industry, we can serve Indonesia better. Next slide, please. It's an immense privilege for me to work in Indonesia. I never expected to work in Indonesia. One of the great gifts of life is the journey that we're taking on. And I do believe that I was brought here to serve. I do believe I was brought here to do good. And I do believe that we are having an impact. This often in higher society academic circles is called the double bottom line: sustainability and financial inclusion, doing good. That's not how I feel. How I feel is when I wake up in the morning, I am paranoid about serving my customer. I'm paranoid about serving the staff in the organization. And I try to create systems and processes around scalability. As you go through this course, as you learn more about FinTech, and I'm sure maybe in the future there'll be people here that maybe I go on to work for, think about how you can use that to impact society for good. Think about how the industry, whether in the future you work in a bank, work in a FinTech, work in a regulator, work in the government, work in your own business. Think about that and how you can stay customer-centric. I'd also encourage you to listen to some of the online assets around businesses like Amazon, who created culture around their product. FinTech is about the product more than any business in the world. The product has to be right, and the product has to be sustainable, and the product has to be viable, and the product has to serve a multitude of people in a multitude of geographies, and the product has to be governed, regulated, which makes it challenging. Think about how you go through this course, please. Think about how you take this knowledge and you are one of the people that accelerate Indonesia forward to its rightful place as a top 5 economy in the world. I'm very grateful for this time. God bless. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pak Jason, for that wonderfully illuminating and mind-opening presentation, or rather a recorded version of Pak Jason. But now we have here with us in person, and as we live and breathe, please join me in welcoming the CEO of OVO, Mr. Jason Thompson. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Super. So it's a very, so first of all, thank you allowing me to record my session. I had a board meeting this afternoon, so I didn't want the opportunity to miss the sharing, but also had to do my job.
It was perfectly understandable. But do you have anything more to say to these students right here before we enter to this second session?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I genuinely mean that being in Indonesia, being in the center of, when we look at FinTech around the world, I've been very lucky. I've worked in many, many different geographies, from Russia to the Middle East, in Europe, America. But right now, the FinTech revolution is in Southeast Asia. And I read early this morning that China is redirecting its efforts towards the ASEAN community and potentially even Africa. You know, the Western world is looking at Southeast Asia, and we're here. And we have the opportunity together to change people's lives. And I think that is a privilege that we should all take very seriously. And whether it's the good days, whether we see our business growing and evolving, or whether it's the challenging days, the privilege is the same. We should look at both those, you know, the challenges and the great things, and we should look at them with the same outlook, that we should have the same energy and enthusiasm to learn from our mistakes as we do from our the things that we do well. But I think it's a great privilege for all of us to be involved in FinTech.
Okay, thank you, Pak JT. It was a pleasure sharing this stage with you. Now, please allow me to switch back to my native language. um, Baik, teman-teman, itu tadi dari Pak Jason, dan sekarang kita akan memasuki ke sesi 2, di mana Pak Prasetyan Toko akan membedah gitu ya, membedah presentasi yang tadi. Mungkin karena tadi waktunya kita cukup mepet, mungkin Pak Pras silakan langsung dimulai saja, fresh.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Jason, for your very insightful presentation. Let me just give short summary of your presentation and allow me to do it in Bahasa to make audience much more better understand.
Terima kasih banyak, Pak.
Para mahasiswa dan Bapak Ibu yang mengikuti kuliah ini, saya kira jelas sekali bahwa FinTech, saya akan berangkat dari kesimpulan yang tadi dibuat oleh Pak Jason bahwa FinTech itu bukan semata-mata soal teknologi saja. Jadi salah satu aspek penting dari FinTech adalah teknologi. Tetapi itu bukan satu-satunya aspek yang penting. Nah, pertama FinTech tentu adalah sebuah opportunity. Tadi Pak Jason berangkat dari konteks bahwa di Indonesia, apalagi kalau kita bicara soal Indonesia, itu opportunity-nya masih besar sekali, dan opportunity itu sesuatu yang potensial, ya, belum actual. Dia adalah pasif karena opportunity. Nah, yang menjadi menarik adalah bagaimana opportunity itu didekati dengan sebuah pendekatan, dan ini saya kira yang penting, ya. FinTech adalah sebuah pendekatan bisnis yang menggabungkan antara aspek financial, ya, dan teknologi. FinTech adalah perkawinan antara aspek financial dan teknologi, dan menghasilkan sebuah bisnis model dan kemudian bisnis proses yang spesifik, yang unik. Yang tadi sudah dijelaskan sangat jelas bahwa mesti ada aspek agility-nya, mesti ada aspek governance-nya, mesti ada aspek financial-nya, dan semuanya itu menghasilkan sebuah bisnis proses dan pendekatan bisnis yang unik, yang mendiferensiasi industri yang ada gitu. Meskipun begitu, FinTech dalam hal ini kasusnya OVO tadi dijelaskan dengan sangat jelas bahwa FinTech itu bukan sesuatu yang baru sebetulnya, tetapi eksis dalam sebuah ekosistem yang sudah ada. Secara teknologi, kalau kita bicara soal financial and technology, teknologinya itu sendiri adalah teknologi yang bermacam-macam sebetulnya, dari berbagai macam aspek digabungkan menjadi satu ekosistem. Soal data, bagaimana memanfaatkan data, memanfaatkan machine learning, memanfaatkan artificial intelligence, tapi di sana pasti ada aspek teknologi yang lain, ada cloud computing, ada Internet of Things, dan macam-macam sebagai satu ekosistem teknologi. Tetapi sebagai sebuah bisnis dan sebagai model bisnis, dia juga berada dalam sebuah ekosistem yang sudah ada gitu. Traditional business, regulator, customer, dan sebagainya itu. Dan justru fungsi dari FinTech adalah memaksimalisasi dari ekosistem yang ada itu lewat satu perspektif dan pendekatan yang saya kira penting sekali adalah kolaborasi. Ini saya kira satu aspek penting sekali yang menjadi penciri dari industri yang berbasis teknologi, dalam hal ini di dalam industri keuangan gitu ya. Nah, maka dari itu memang FinTech itu pertama-tama adalah meng-create demand, meng-create opportunity, dan men-generate growth gitu ya. Tetapi juga memprotect market dan engage dengan existing customer gitu. Sehingga memang pada ujungnya, meskipun FinTech ini aspek teknologi dan aspek innovation-nya itu sangat intens gitu ya, sangat besar. Tapi pada ujungnya harus berorientasi pada bagaimana mendorong stability, bagaimana mendorong sustainability, dan bagaimana mendorong inclusion gitu. Jadi itulah indahnya FinTech gitu, yang berangkat dari inovasi karena teknologi dan melihat peluang, dan sangat agile bisnis proses dan praktek bisnisnya, tetapi pada ujungnya tetap berorientasi kepada stability dan sustainability dan inclusion gitu. Saya kira itu yang akan menjadi tema besar yang nanti akan dipertajam dari setiap aspeknya dalam kuliah satu semester ini. Saya kira begitu, Pak Pangestu. Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Pras. Nah, sekarang kita masuk ke sesi ketiga, yaitu sesi tanya jawab, gitu ya. Waktu kita sudah tidak terlalu banyak lagi. Silakan jika ada pertanyaan dari ibu bapak, teman-teman mahasiswa dalam bahasa Indonesia juga tidak ada masalah. Nanti saya bisa bantu translate. But I saw Pak Jason nodding along when Pak Pras was delivering his discussion. So, silakan jika ada. Perhaps maybe the first question, I do have a question for you, Pak Jason. How do you position yourself? I mean, by yourself, I mean you and your company, in these volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous times. Like how do you readjust your strategy if there's any adjustments?
Yeah, over the past 18 months, our strategy has changed. Not necessarily our strategy, our focuses and our investments have changed. So during COVID, first of all, we had to invest more time with government and regulator, because there was a requirement to support things like Kartu Prakerja. And then secondly, we had to look at our investment strategies and where we were accelerating. So for me, you'll see in the presentation, and you'll hear me talk a lot about principles, that I find that if you're volatile in your leadership style, then your organization becomes volatile. And if we go back 3 years ago, the way we measure OVO is through our OVO engagement score. And it used to be about 65%, which is very low. Today, it's about 80%. So 80% of people in our company are very happy, which is when we benchmark that against, Traveloka, Tokopedia, Grab, people like that, we're very high. And one of the things I think we put this down to is, as a leadership team, before we make changes, we review our principles, we update our principles, and we communicate our principles. So whilst our strategy has been volatile over the last 18 months, we've spent, we now have town halls every 2 weeks to communicate. But ultimately, the principles that we had to adopt was that we had to accelerate our financial performance. We had to improve our unit economics across the whole business. We had to focus on revenue gain over new business development. And we entered a new principle, which was serving the nation during difficult times. And I think by anchoring these 3 principles, frequency of communication, we could actually move forward very, very quickly. I'm a great believer in a saying from Alex Ferguson, the ex-Manchester United manager as well, that control the controllables. If you try and control everything else, you'll go crazy. So during these difficult times, I asked the team to really control the controllables.
Okay, I'm going to quote you on that for my next 2 classes. Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm not a Man United fan.
Neither am I, so you're good. Pak Pras, do you have anything to ask to Pak Jason?
Saya kira ada pertanyaan di chat box
Okay.
dari mahasiswa.
Okay. Pak Jason, we have a question from Jose Guardiola from the Faculty of Law. He asks, what kind of protection that fintech companies usually provide to secure data privacy of consumers?
There's very different levels. So good question, Jose, and it's a very complicated answer if we were to take that on its entirety, because ultimately there's a high level of cybersecurity that happens in the business. We have a dedicated cyber team. We work in partnership with Google. Google is resident in Indonesia for data privacy and data governance. So they achieve the local laws, which is very important to us. So we sometimes we're using combination of partnership services. Other times it's our own cybersecurity. But actually, one of the things that we invested in very early was our own in-house team, because the way that identity systems and risk and fraud systems work in Western Europe, North America, and even China is a lot to do with the infrastructure there. And we don't have that infrastructure in Indonesia. So we actually built out our own dedicated systems that are built specifically and bespokely for Indonesia. So OVO's fraud is around 50 Sing dollars a week, very, very low. And the reason that we do that is because we have a dedicated team looking, monitoring, and developing the systems specifically for use here. And then 2 layers of internal, external, cyber, and security. Only by doing this do we create the right level of security for the customer. But of course, all organizations, as we've seen in Indonesia, are permanently under attack. And often that's not from within Indonesia, it's internationally. So it has to be a part of our investment. It has to be a key part of our technology strategy to protect and defend the customer.
Thank you for that, Pak Jason. And the next question is from Noah. Noah is asking, he would like your perspective regarding cryptocurrency as the way forward in the financial services industry.
Yeah, it's a very complicated, again, question. It's not easy to summarize, but my prediction is, as we see, so at the moment, what we're seeing is different organizations create pseudo currencies and try and use those currencies as intermediary currencies to traditional physical currencies. So whilst this is happening, it's really falsely inflating sometimes the value of intermediary currencies. What I think will be the real step change is when we see, we've been looking at China for a while now, that's looking at least complementing its domestic currency with crypto. And I think as we see nations develop cryptocurrency that run alongside an existing currency strategy, that's when I see this will change globally. We've seen that if we look at the work that Facebook did originally around their own crypto and then being in crypto exchange services, a crypto, that again was influenced heavily through the regulator in Europe and around the world. So I do see that regulators in developing countries and leading countries in terms of economic size are looking at the opportunity to develop their own crypto to complement domestic currency. I think that's when the change will really happen. But I keep looking at the share price, the value of crypto, and I think everybody has been expecting there to be some kind of crash, and it keeps climbing. It does concern me the value of crypto today and the usage. So in Indonesia today, crypto is not something that we're focused on. It's not something that the regulator is really focused on, my understanding right now, because for financial inclusion, we have a lot of localization issues that we need to solve before we move to a fully digitalized currency.
Okay, thank you, Pak Jason. I would love to dive into that, but as we are running out of time, I believe we have one more question. Last but not least, from who's that? Anggi, from Anggi. I think this is a good closing question, Pak JT. What is OVO's strategy like to survive and compete against your competitors? How do you make your consumers, your customers, remain loyal with your product?
I think the whole point, though, is that you've brought out the right word. That it's about customer. It's about customer centricity, and you can change your investment strategy and you can move market. I covered this in the presentation, that you often see in emerging markets, volatile market share shifting, but the customer will return to where they love, they like, they enjoy, where serves them best. So we're in one of the most volatile regions in terms of market development and competition. The market is still relatively nascent, so we're seeing mergers, acquisitions as a very buoyant sector at the moment in FinTech. But ultimately, how you serve the customer and build trust will be your biggest differentiator. So if you want to improve your unit economic, I would say focus on your customer satisfaction. Move from minimum viable product to maximum viable product. And that will improve your unit economic.
Maximum viable product, it is. Okay, I believe that's all the questions we have for you, Pak JT. Thank you very much for your responses, for your time. Now, Pak Pras, do you have anything more to add?
Yeah, Pak Jason, I have one final question, maybe on behalf of the young audience here. So how do you see the readiness of the young digital talents in Indonesia? And how do you propose if is any gap on that to fill the gap of this gap of talent?
It's a great question, Pat. So let me maybe just break this into two questions. Number one, around how do we bridge the gap of talent? And then number two, the future talent of Indonesia. So first of all, I think one of the things I've tried to do is stay committed to an Indonesian research and development center that is focused on our customer. So that my strategy has been the really back-end development, platform developments in Bangalore. We have some data science here, a small team in Singapore, but the majority of the talent is in Indonesia. And so my job has been to really import talent into Indonesia to complement and share experience, because we're developing the talent for the whole of industry. So outsourcing, we shouldn't be outsourcing Indonesia. We should be insourcing the talent to Indonesia. And that principle is very important to me. So in my office, you will find, lots of different people in different positions, but the ratio of expat to domestic is definitely highly polarized. And it would be wrong of me not to mention International Women's Day. We have a great blend of male and female. I love this in our company. FinTech is a real driver of equality. I really recruit based on experience and talent, aptitude and attitude, nothing else. But number one is let's complement local talent with international talent, and let's develop it. Number two, you asked a great question around, there is also, when you think about this talent and you think about the future and you think about what we need to do and the people on this call, my humble advice for you is, as you can see, I'm not a young man anymore. And I find people in Indonesia are too ambitious about the next level and the next title. And in my career, I can go back that if I take my last 3 jobs in Microsoft and in Euronet and in this joint venture in Indonesia, that will be 9, 14, 18 years in 3 companies. And in every company, I've been promoted and my span of control has increased. I've always focused about doing my best in my role and learning as much as I can. And I've always hoped by doing that, I would be promoted. My humble advice is any gaps in your experience, it will catch up with you. Focus on learning, focus on growing, and focus on performing. That will help Indonesia. Title and money is a very short-term satisfaction. That'd be my humble advice, Pat.
Okay. Thank you, Pak, for the encouraging explanation for the young audience here. Thank you. Very good.
Pat, before I leave, I just did a little bit of research, and my partner Jennifer is Indonesian. She's a Chinese Indonesian lady. Her family are from Indonesia, and her mother graduated from the university, Ibu Jenny. So when I shared with the family today, I was with you, Ibu Jenny was saying, this is my university, this is where I graduated from. So there's a family tie as well.
Okay, thank you, Pak.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for our third session. Thank you again, Pak Jason. It was a huge pleasure, and we hope to see you. We look forward to see you many more times. And Pak Pras, thank you as well for your participation, your time, your invaluable knowledge. Now, it's time for me to close this event right here. So please allow me to switch languages again, Pak JT. Baik, teman-teman semua, ini sudah demikian rangkaian acara. Nah, ini ada sedikit pesan, bukan pesan sponsor, pesan biasa saja. Bagi yang sudah terdaftar pada mata kuliah ini untuk 1 semester ke depan, ya selama 1 semester ini silakan mengisi presensi karena kehadiran ini dihitung gitu ya kalau ingin lulus mata kuliah ini. Nah, Sedangkan selebihnya ya, materi yang tadi itu bisa diakses di YouTube. Jadi bisa berkali-kali nonton Pak Jason nanti di YouTube itu. Baik, kalau begitu terima kasih sekali lagi Pak Jason dan rekan-rekan di OVO. Terima kasih rekan-rekan Atma Jaya, para mahasiswa, para partisipan atas waktunya. Saya mewakili FinTech Academy mengucapkan terima kasih dan sampai jumpa di lain kesempatan. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.
Terima kasih.
Thank you, Pak. See you
Thank you so
again.
much, sir.
Bye, Pak.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.